Welcome to the Holy Post. More Americans than ever are single, but they're not happy about it. A new article in The Atlantic is examining how the sexes are drifting apart, why more men are looking for a partner than women, and the side effects of using an app rather than community to find a date. Then political scientist Hahrie Han's new book, Undivided, explores why the racial solidarity program at an evangelical megachurch was more successful than corporate DEI programs, and how that success created unexpected challenges for the predominantly white church. Also this week, the Swiss make an AI Jesus, and a Chicago school kid makes a medical breakthrough. Hey, before we jump into the episode, a reminder that subscriptions to HOLYPOST Plus can now be purchased and gifted to someone else. It's a great way to both help someone you love discover smart, pro-neighbor Christian content, which is all too rare these days, and support our effort to make more of that content at the same time. Check out all the stuff available to subscribers by going to holypost.com. Here is episode 647.
Hey there, welcome back to the Holy Post podcast. This is Phil Vischer. I'm here with two delightful people. Delightful in all they do and say, helpful to everyone around them, friends to animals and children, and champions of democracy. We're here with Skye Jitani. Hi, Skye.
Hi, Phil.
And Caitlin Chess. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, Phil.
Hi, I could travel with you and do your intro. Would you like
that? Was beautiful. I would love that. I would love to be introduced everywhere I go like that.
Yeah.
That was nice.
Friend of animals and small children and champion of democracy.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Skye, what was that
skeptical.
sound? Yeah.
Because then I'd have to travel with you.
Oh. Well, no, I'll travel separately and I'll just show up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Skye and I don't like traveling with people.
That's not very nice.
No. Oh, it's not about nice and not nice. It's about temperament. And some people enjoy solo travel.
Oh.
Well, yeah, there's that. But some people enjoy solo travel. Because you can just kind of disappear into your head and into your thoughts. And you do that with a book, right? You like to sit with a book on a plane.
Yeah. I just would
But-
always rather be with someone than not.
Really? Okay. Well, we've found a key difference between Caitlin and Skye and Phil.
Yep, there we go.
Like with Phil's love language is solitude.
Yeah.
That's not how that works.
And it's my spiritual gift. And now it's time for the theme song. What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. Skye and Phil and the Holy Post.
And sometimes Caitlin.
Today's episode is sponsored by Sunday's Food for Dogs. We've been talking about Sunday's Food for Dogs for a while now, and I gotta say, our dog Keena really loves the stuff, and so do we. It's healthy dog food that's easy to store and serve, made from a short list of human-grade ingredients. Sunday's contains 90% meat, 10% superfoods, and 0% anything unhealthy or artificial. Unlike other fresh dog foods, Sunday's is air-dried, so it doesn't require refrigeration or prep. Folks who switch their dogs to Sunday's report softer fur, fresher breath, better energy, and more. Sunday's comes right to our door, so we never run out of dog food. Easy to store, easy to serve, good for your dog. And you can get 40% off your first order of Sunday's. Go to sundaysfordogs.com/holypost. That's sundaysfordogs.com/holypost. Or use code HOLYPOST at checkout for 40% off your first order. This episode of The Holy Post is sponsored by Hiya Health. Hey, do you have kids? Do you care about their health? Of course you do. Most kids' vitamins are basically candy in disguise, filled with 2 teaspoons of sugar, unhealthy chemicals, and other gummy junk kids really shouldn't be eating. That's why Hiya was created, the pediatrician-approved, super-powered, chewable vitamin for kids. 0 sugar, 0 gummy junk, yet they taste great and are perfect for picky eaters. Hiya fills in the most common gaps in modern children's diets diets to provide the full body nourishment our kids need with a yummy taste they love. And we've worked out a special deal with Hiya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you need to go to hiyahealth.com/holypost. This deal is not available on their regular website. Go to hiyahealth.com/holypost and get your kids the full body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults. And thanks to Hiya Health for sponsoring this episode. Hey, Sky, we talked about doing something new on the podcast, which we threw out to viewers, and apparently they took us up on it.
Yes.
So do you have a surprise package to open?
Okay, this arrived at the office today. It is a package sent to the Holy Post. Attention, Caitlin Chess.
Huh.
We have not opened this. We don't know what's in it, although it feels like clothing.
I'm so
feels
excited.
like fabric.
I thought it would be kind of exciting to open it on air and discover what. Now, this is very risky. And if this goes
it
poorly,
could go badly.
If this goes poorly, it's either going to be edited out or reserved for Holy Post Plus only.
What if it's filled with an unidentifiable powder or substance?
Oh, well, Sky's the only one.
Yeah, I'm in this room alone. So
Taste it, Sky.
Caitlin,
Taste it. Tell us if it's poison.
Caitlin, just to make this clear, it is addressed to you. Do I have your permission to open this?
Yes, Sky, you can open
Okay,
it.
or do you want me to wait until you... Okay, I just...
We don't want
I'm
to.
so
don't want to
excited.
assume anything. Okay.
Yeah.
We don't want to do federal mail tampering on.
It appears to be
YouTube.
wrapped. There is
So
a
kind.
note.
A note.
Okay. I guess it says, "Hi, Caitlin. Greetings from Omaha. We're a neighborhood development nonprofit that are big fans of yours. We hope you enjoy this pink shirt advocating for strong and opportunity-rich neighborhoods for all kids in all zip codes everywhere. P.S.
See?
Whoa!
Friend
Please-
of kids, children, and animals, champion of democracy.
Please visit if you are ever passing through. And the organization is In Common Community Development." I guess they get a free plug because they were the first
That sounds great.
to send us a pink. Oh, this is indeed pink. Look at this. Oh, there's more than one. There's more than one.
Oh boy. Oh.
Wow.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
So kind of them.
Okay, you got to go to
I'm
YouTube to
assuming-
look at it because it's kind of cool.
Wow.
What's the other
I'm
one?
guessing
Different
these are
sizes? Two sizes?
Let's see.
Yeah, it's hard to
Medium,
guess
small.
size from YouTube.
Right.
I'm just so
So
glad that
these-
someone really took us up on pink, sent some pink.
Yeah, this is very
that's the
pink.
best.
And
Sky,
one shout out
Sky,
to...
you need to wear the larger one. Okay,
I don't
next
think medium's
week,
going to work on me.
Is that the larger one? It's a small
That's
and a
the
medium?
Yeah, there's a small and a medium.
I would
Although
like
they-
to see
they
you
sent us lots
in
of
the
stickers.
medium. I would like to see you in the medium.
Me too.
All right, well, I don't
Christmas
do
party?
shirts.
Christmas
I
party?
do hats. Somebody
Okay,
in,
what's your hat?
My hat was given by somebody who came to our Long Beach event a couple weeks ago, and it's got the aliens from Toy Story. Mm-hmm. Right, but it's not just the aliens from Toy Story because
What
is it?
What else is
It
it?
does more. Hold on. See that? Look at that.
Lights
That's
up.
what they say.
Oh.
Yeah, ooh, yeah.
That's great. It lights
That's very
up and
cool.
flashes.
Flashes, or you can
Technology
just
these
do-
days.
Leave it on the whole time.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
Definitely
Is
the
it-
most technological headwear I've gotten
Yeah.
so far.
That's impressive. How many hats have you received to date?
Oh gosh, I think over 20.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
Wow.
They're all
So
out
you,
there.
You got
yeah.
a backlog to get
I do have a
through.
backlog.
We better start doing more shows a week so you can get through all your hats.
And I only do the hats on Holy Post. I could do them on SkyPod or some other stuff, but or during interview segments.
Yeah.
But I don't.
No.
Only for you guys.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. Caitlin's very happy right now. She's in a very happy mood. So we should probably change that. It's time for News of the Butt.
Hey!
And now it's time for news of the butt.
Phil, I
Here we
should have
go.
known. I should have known where that was going.
Chicago school kid. Okay, you've heard about, Chicago schools don't have a great reputation. Chicago school kid discovers new cancer-fighting compound in bird poop. Caitlin, Caitlin's
whoa.
intrigued. She's
am
repelled
intrigued.
and intrigued at the same time. Bringing bird poop to school is usually frowned upon, but middle schoolers in Chicago are being celebrated as bona fide biomedical scientists after one student delivered some special goose droppings to their science club. With the supervision of researchers from the University of Illinois, this student carefully isolated a bacterium from the goose poop that showed antibiotic activity. A natural compound produced by the bacterium is wholly new to science.
Wow.
He found something new. They said there's nothing new under the sun. Yes, there is. And Chicago public school kids are going to find it. Doesn't say he was a Chicago public school, but I assume he was. A natural compound produced by the bacterium is wholly new to science and in the lab shows cancer-fighting properties.
I've asked so many questions already.
Sky.
No, not bad questions, just honest
I just
questions.
feel like you're ready to be like, I don't believe this.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to work. I think we're all going to die. Okay. What is this guy?
Well, like, how did he know? He just why did he bring?
Curiosity.
They were supposed to collect and test various things or...
Like, sounds like what they like bring something in to test, and he decided, I'm going to bring in some goose poop.
Goose poop. No, they were supposed to
I like
cultivate
this story.
bacteria. Yeah, thank you. They were supposed to cultivate bacteria. As dangerous bacteria around the world grow resistant to today's arsenal of antibiotics, scientists are desperately searching for new medicine, and the natural world is one of the best places to go searching for antibacterial compounds. So, the University of Illinois is working with public school kids to teach them we're empowering the next generation to go into the world and study goose poop. And I think that's fantastic. This has been the news of the butt. You can comment more if you want to, Sky, but I don't really have anything more to say.
This has been the news of the butt.
I loved that. That was great.
Okay,
That's the first news of the butt I've ever liked.
Hey, that's the first, we'll call that the good news of the butt.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. And you know what another word for good news is?
I knew this was happening.
No.
No,
let's not go there.
No, not
you.
gonna.
Nope.
Evangelion. A Swiss church has set up an AI Jesus in a confessional booth.
Wait. There's a Swiss church?
What?
Sky.
I thought they were all secularists and Muslims
secular.
now.
It didn't say there were any people in it, but there's a church there.
Okay.
A church in Switzerland. I'm really curious as to what you two think about this. A church in Switzerland deployed an AI Jesus in its confessional booth as part of an experiment. Clearly, it's an experiment. It's not just they're saying this is how all confession should happen from here on. Part of an experiment using the latest digital technology in a sacred space. During the test period, the digital version of Jesus.
He's also a digital virgin.
Hey, it's Christmas time. During the test period, the digital version of Jesus attempted to respond to parishioners' confessions. And questions. Attempted to respond to parishioners' confession. I'm pretty sure it did respond. The digital Jesus did respond. Whether they were successful responses would be the matter to discuss. To respond to parishioners' confessions and questions about faith and morality with scripture-based responses. The findings from roughly 900 conversations with visitors, which were transcribed anonymously, So, AI
there are
Jesus.
some people in that church.
AI Jesus can feed 5,000 without getting tired. Just keep going. The findings from roughly 900 conversations were transcribed anonymously indicated that many visitors were emotionally moved or left in deep thought. Okay. The person at the church that was in charge of the project says what was really interesting was to see people really talked with him in a serious way. They didn't come to make jokes. Now, the person in charge says, AI Jesus was not a substitute for human interaction or sacraments administered by priests. It was clear that it was a computer. It was clear it was not confession. AI Jesus wasn't programmed to give absolutions or prayers. At the end, it was more summary of conversation.
Have you seen that commercial that's going around right now? Is it for like the Google Gemini smart
I've
assistant
seen the
thing
Gemini,
where people are having in-depth conversations about their dreams and have you seen that commercial?
No.
Where you just talk to the Gemini.
I don't like that.
It's a conversational AI.
Right, that's kind of sounds like that.
It was named Jesus instead of Gemini. People would talk to it differently, I think.
That's kind of where it gets lost on me, is if you're saying this is not a priest, this is not a real person, this is not a sacrament, this is not for absolution, none of those things,
right?
Then why depict the AI like Jesus?
Yeah. And by the way, it was also on a screen on the other side of the screen in the confessional booth. And it was an AI generated Jesus face also.
Yeah. All of that's creepy.
So, and that's my question. It's a fun experiment, but why not do an AI priest experiment? Why do an AI Jesus? That seems like...
Sin boldly. Remember, Phil? Sin boldly.
Yeah, go all the way. The other thing about this that's so strange is it'd be one thing if there was just like a booth set up to like talk to Jesus. It wasn't in a confessional. The fact that they're clarifying like this AI Jesus did not provide absolution. What's the point of confession? Like that's part of, in the Catholic Church, that's part of that's why it's a sacrament. That's why they're clarifying that it's not. But like that actually feels like its own secularizing problem to make it sound like all that people need is to just vent their problems or to like admit that they've done bad things instead of actually the Christian belief in both the Catholic and Protestant churches that we do receive absolution. We don't believe as Protestants that we need this particular sacrament to do it. But in my church every Sunday, we still confess our sins. And the pastor says, not forgiven from the pastor, but forgiven by God. You are forgiven. Like, otherwise, what is the point of us doing this? It's just making ourselves feel bad. That's not a Christian view of confession, regardless of if it's a human or AI.
Yeah. This strikes. So many people are upset that like the broader culture is diminishing the value of religion. I think we're doing a pretty good job ourselves. When the church does it, like they're taking what they believe to be a sacrament and they're turning it into a sideshow. Like how many people went into that booth because they were genuinely desiring to confess sin, and how many went in because they're like, "Ooh, I want to see how this AI Jesus thing works." Right? That's not good faith. That's just spectacle.
Yeah, I don't think they set it up in a way where anyone would think it was a legitimate confessional, even though it was in a confessional booth.
But that's the point, is the medium is the message. Don't make it look like Jesus. Question. Don't put it in a confessional. Don't like create a little
It should be an app on your phone.
Yeah, I've used that. It's weird.
For confession?
The confessional phone
the
app?
AI app that lets you talk to Jesus or Augustine or Mary Magdalene. I mean, I feel negatively about that too, but it's at least no one was confused about whether it was a sacrament or not.
Yeah. Okay. So what do we learn from this? Anything? What can we apply?
Also, I'm confused why no one made any jokes. I feel like that's actually a really appropriate way to talk to Jesus.
Maybe because it was in a sacred space and they felt they needed to act appropriately?
I would have loved to know how AI Jesus responded to some jokes.
I don't know. I think they should stick to chocolate and watches.
Well, it is interesting because it sounds like if he was responding, it bothers me that the priest described it as he, as if it was Jesus. That's troubling. We may need to look into that a little bit more. What was I going to say? Oh, if it was, it used ChatGPT. And it was looking for scriptural answers. So you've got ChatGPT training itself on the Bible. How is it going to know? I mean, AI just looking at the Bible and then trying to answer all of life's questions. That would be interesting to say, what does ChatGPT do with writings as diverse as the entire Bible, having the ability to hold the entire Bible in its little computer brain all the time?
I'm assuming it draws from more than just the Bible. It probably draws from all kinds of commentary and literature about the Bible, because I mean they feed all kinds of content into these language. What are they called? Large language models. Yeah.
The LLMs.
Right.
The other problem with this is another reason why it's worse that it's Jesus and not a priest. Jesus said all kinds of surprising things. Like, to think that this is Jesus is to make it sound like all Jesus said was ever just kind of a compilation of everything that had already been written in the Bible. A priest, again, I don't think an AI priest is a good idea at all, but at least you could say that sort of is approximating someone who's studied scripture and studied commentaries, and here's the wisdom they would give. With Jesus, part of what is distinct in people's encounter with Jesus, even before they understand that he is God incarnate, is he says surprising, confusing things that come out of nowhere from our perspective. And trying to approximate that would be impossible and blasphemous and not good.
Yeah. But what if it was just an AI Bible commentary that was trained? I mean, would you need to be able to say which commentaries I want my AI commentary to be trained on? You know, because there's so many traditions, and are you going to read all of them?
I bet there's a way to specify, like, help me understand prayer, the Christian idea of prayer from the Reformed tradition, blah, blah, blah. And then it'll give you that kind of response. I just think the more, regardless, forget the Jesus AI, I just don't like AI in general taking on personal characteristics. I think that's malformative.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying these tools aren't useful or have a role to play, but I don't think humanizing them is going to be healthy for any of us.
Yeah. But if we get AI right, then we won't have to worry about finding people to be in relationship with, right? And then we can stop dating.
Oh,
nice transition, Phil.
Whoa.
Thank you. That brings me to my next story. This from The Atlantic this month: the slow, quiet demise of American romance. Long before calls for a 4B style sex strike, and you know what the 4B, it came from Korea. It's women saying, I'm not going to date, marry, have children, or have sex. It's a commitment.
Those don't all start with B.
In Korean, they do. If you're using our alphabet and speaking Korean, they all start with B. I have no idea why it's called the 4B.
Yeah.
But it's women protesting at the patriarchy and the treatment of women by disavowing all contact with men. Yes, Caitlin?
It's the Korean word for no. If it's transliterated, it starts with B. So it's 4 no's. Not doing this.
Oh,
got it.
4
So in English, it would be the
no's.
4 no's or the 4 N's.
4 no's. Yeah.
Yeah, no dating, no sex, no marriage, no children. Well, goodbye, South Korea. It was nice knowing you. Thanks for all the cars. This is different, though. This is looking at dating in the U.S. and what's happening. A big shift is happening among straight American men and women, a parting of ways that began long before this election. Many people, perhaps women most of all, have been quietly turning away from heterosexual partnership. That's not a problem, is it? It couldn't possibly be a problem. Pew Research, in an analysis of census data, found that in 2019, 38% of adults were unpartnered, compared with 29% in 1990. So it's gone up by a third in, 30 years. In a survey Pew conducted that same year, half of single adults said they were not seeking dates. When Pew divided that result by gender, it found that 61% of single men said they were looking for dates or wanting to find relationship, while only 38% of single women said the same. So way more single men would like to not be single, where many single women are like, nah.
I gotta admit, that surprised me. That surprised me.
But there's much stronger negative reaction to inability to find a woman in the young online male community. It's the whole incel population.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Caitlin has something to say.
Well, I was just going to say, I think part of that difference is that women, we've talked about this in the show before, but women in general, and how much of this is socially conditioned and how much of it is innate, I don't know, but women are more likely to create communities for themselves apart from a partnership than men are. So women might be quite dissatisfied with dating, which is clear in this article, and I have seen that in my experience and among people in my community. But most of the single women that I know have put themselves intentionally and sometimes with a lot of work into a really rich, full community where they have a lot of deep relationships. Whereas even in my experience, and clearly some data backs it up, men are not doing that. And the kind of assumption in some spaces for a man who doesn't have a lot of...
My dogs are barking.
That terrified me.
My dog. Sorry, everyone. I apologize for that, everyone. That was very unprofessional of me, and I'll sit out next week's show as my penance for that.
Oh, good.
Just confess to AI Jesus your error.
There you go.
Dear AI Jesus, please forgive me for my dog and strike him mute whenever I'm recording.
Oh.
Okay, Caitlin.
Well, I feel like a lot of men don't do that. What were you going to say?
Do what? Do what? In our church group yesterday, we were talking about the what's his name who was struck mute because he didn't believe that. What's his name? His wife, Zechariah. We were talking about Zechariah. Yeah. So see, God does that. Yes, my dog
clearly
did not believe that I was recording, so he should be struck mute until the podcast is over, just like Zechariah. Okay, Caitlin.
The point is just, I think the fact that I think men and women are probably both pretty equally dissatisfied with the way dating culture is, the options available to them, etc. However, men are probably more dissatisfied by that reality as a whole, thinking about their lives, because the common wisdom in a lot of spaces for a man who's disconnected from community is like, meet someone and get married. And that will be your community, or she will put you into a community. Whereas women typically do that themselves.
Do you think part of it is that the social stigmas here have changed a lot? Like there was a time some generations ago where being a single woman at 30 or 35 or 40 carried a lot more stigma than if you were a single man at 30, 35 or 40. But that's no longer the case, is it?
Depends on the community and the part of the country, but yeah.
Daniel Cox, director of the Survey Center on American Life, talked with young men while reporting his forthcoming book, Uncoupled, on the U.S. gender divide. Many of the young men he talked with discussed watching the women around them flourish while the men themselves floundered. So in college, more women are in college, more women are graduating from college. If you look around the classroom, Cox said, it's their female peers who are killing it. They're the leaders of all these clubs. They're going to college at much higher rates. And when they get to college, they're doing much better. Men also experience higher rates of addiction and suicide and report having fewer friends. Many men Cox has spoken with are aware of the ways some of their peers are faltering. At the same time, they're hearing cultural conversations about patriarchy and male advantage, and they feel that those critiques are unfair coming from women they see as succeeding spectacularly. Caitlin, would you say you're succeeding spectacularly, and is it okay if I resent you?
Wow. I don't know about spectacularly. I would prefer that you not resent me.
Okay.
Right. This gets to that zero-sum assumption that as women have more opportunities, do better in society, it must be coming at the expense of men. And
there is hard data of men doing less well and women doing more well. So you can say it's not causal. You can say it's just corollary. Yeah. But yeah, we've taken the guardrails off of what women can do, and they're really enjoying it and doing things quite well. And men are, why are we struggling so much? Does anybody know why men are struggling so much? Sky,
I would hate to generalize. I think it depends on the particular man, but
okay, well, let's pick one. Think of someone you know, Sky. And describe their struggles.
I mean, to a degree, I think back to what Dallas Willard always used to say, which is your system is perfectly designed to produce the results you are experiencing. And I read this book many years ago by Benjamin Barber about consumer culture, and it's called Consumed. And the argument of the book essentially is that a consumer culture, by design, has to get children to act like adults and get adults to act like children in order for the consumption values to really be driven throughout the society. And I think what we see, especially in younger men, is a delayed adulthood or prolonged adolescence, the way you say, because the consumer culture has shaped them to prolong that adolescence and behave like boys longer and longer and longer. And then they reach, physical, sexual adulthood, and they reach adulthood ages where they should be engaged in adult-like responsibilities and behaviors, and they are just simply not equipped to do it. And they resent the fact that they were not equipped to do it, and then they get caught in this vicious cycle of immaturity. And I think that's a large part of it. And men in particular, most men, boys, whatever, are by temperament, hormones, whatever you want to say, are more susceptible to many of those immaturing impulses of our consumer culture than women generally are.
Okay, well, here's another angle from this article. Cox also talked to many young women and said there was a lot of grimness just about the way men treated women, a sort of gender despair. He's found that both women and men believe that their gender disadvantages them. When so many men feel underappreciated and so many women feel mistreated, it creates a vicious cycle of resentment. On top of that, he says dating complete strangers probably doesn't help, yet that's how most people do courtship these days on apps. Courtship. What? You don't like that word? I went a courting when I was a boy. Didn't you go a courting, Sky?
Oh, yeah. We courted all over the place.
Yeah, mostly in the parlor. Mostly in the parlor.
Okay.
But this is a really interesting point in the article. This idea of dating people that you have no other social network connection with.
Yep.
And it's a little bit like the way people behave online when they feel anonymous. They behave worse. And so if you don't share a social network with the person you're going out on a date with, they're less inclined to worry about their reputation if things go poorly.
Yeah.
Which incentivizes bad behavior.
And also, if you've got an app in your hand that has just a limitless number of the opposite sex, you always think there's got to be someone better. There's got to be someone better, and I'll just keep flipping, and I'll just throw this one back in the pool after one date, and I'll try again and again and again and again, and I'll give up eventually.
The tyranny of choice. I did a video about this. The
tyranny of choice. That's why we need to go back to arranged marriages. Or do what I did and say, the woman you marry has to be someone you meet at the Okoboji Lakes Bible and Missionary Conference. It doesn't have to be any one specific person. And I tried
just any woman.
I dated my two serious
Lisa's
girlfriends.
enjoying this so much.
My two serious girlfriends were both from the Okoboji Lakes Bible Missionary Conference. My sister's husband was from the Okoboji Lakes Bible Missionary Conference.
Wow.
Many people have met theirs. I would recommend if you were looking, but you have to come for like 20 years. You have to commit, start in childhood and keep going so that you're part of the community.
People don't have the time.
Otherwise, you're just dating anonymously. So I think I've solved the problem, but I don't think my solution is very good. In Pew's 2019 survey, 75% of respondents said that finding a date in the past year had been difficult, and 67% said their dating life wasn't going well. And this has led to women freezing their eggs at growing rates. Many commentators have assumed that the trend of egg freezing is the result of women prioritizing their careers, but research has found that the large majority of women who are freezing eggs would have children sooner rather than later if they could. They're simply struggling to find a co-parent. Almost everyone's reason for egg freezing was, quote, incredible frustration, sadness, and anxiety surrounding partnership. Well, that's not good. Why is it so much harder now than it was 200 years ago? Everyone was married by the time they were 17. They had 5 children by the time they were 25, but 3 of them were dead.
I don't think you have to go back 200 years for some of that. It's a little bit more recent than that, Phil.
Caitlin, you don't remember this, but it's true.
Okay, well, I don't know if I believe you, but I mean, a huge part of this is, like one of you already said this, right? The stigma around some of this has significantly decreased. I don't think we should look back with rose-colored glasses and think like, oh, everyone was married and it was great and they had great lives, and they didn't. A lot of people were married, were in very unhappy marriages. It's hard for us today to speak honestly about the fact that there are some things that have changed that we label progress, that are progress in some ways and come with costs in other ways. It's like we want to either label all of these changes as purely progress or purely decline. And the reality is there are bits of both in all of these changes. And I think part of what makes it so hard is, I'm just speaking for women, like for myself and for lots of single women I know, especially single women who are in their 30s, they're looking around and they're going, it doesn't seem like there's good options. Like this article described, they're meeting men in public or on apps who are really dismissive, who are skeptical of their level of education, who make kind of random critical comments about their bodies because they've been shaped so much by like internet thinking and speaking, and they've been on apps a lot where they just look at statistics about people and make harsh judgments. That's not fun. And they now have the ability to build a life for themselves that is fulfilling and beautiful and has deep relationships. You're just not going to have a lot of motivation to keep doing the dating thing. And I think we have to be, I think what this article helps us understand, which I wish a lot of pastors would read this and think about, is that there's a lot of finger wagging that's happened in a lot of evangelical churches in the last 10 or 15 years about how people just need to get married, how they need to stop waiting, how they need to get married and have kids as quickly as they can. And that advice might be in some ways good, but this article helpfully articulates people are not, in general, just having a great, fun, carefree life, and they don't want to be burdened with marriage and children. Sometimes that's true. That's a message that our larger culture often feeds us. But this article helpfully describes a lot of people are exhausted, they're frustrated, their lives are not turning out the way that they wanted, and they don't feel like they have the agency to do anything about it. Because this is one area of life where it's like you could do everything right, and it still just doesn't happen for you. And having some more compassion from the church to say, we do think marriage and children are beautiful, good things from God that a majority of people will have or should have. We also need to recognize that just kind of wagging our fingers at people who aren't experiencing that in this moment where the statistics are this way is so unhelpful. And I feel like I've had so many conversations with pastors, with single people in churches over the last few years that's like, just demographically, we are going to have way more single adults that are getting older and older in the next few years. And we have to think really creatively about how to take care of them, how to structure our churches differently, how to preach about marriage differently. I belong to a church where there are multiple people I know who are single and in their 30s, 40s, 50s who live with families or live in an intentional community with other people. And it's a really beautiful witness to the reality that the family of God is an actual family. This is the truest family apart from nuclear families. But we're going to have to think creatively about how to address this, because the idea that we can just sort of shame people into getting married and having kids doesn't address the demographic reality or the fact that they're not having a good life and they need to be told to do something else. They're struggling with this. It's hard.
Well, you just ruled out my solution. I was just going to shame everyone into. I mean, I'm
kind of into your arranged marriage idea, Phil. I feel like if the church was to adopt that could be okay.
Okay. So what can the church do? Because we want to be open and welcoming to people who can't find a spouse or who don't want to find a spouse, or who don't want to raise kids. We want to be opening and welcoming. But we recognize, and the author of this, recognizes when you survey people, the majority say they would like a long-term stable relationship. In fact, Cox, after doing all the research, said, the sad part for me is that I don't think there's a fundamental shift in desire, only an outcome. He hears the sentiment, ideally, this would not be my life, but finding a partner is too difficult. It's too hard, and I'm having a lot of negative experiences that I just don't want to have. So part of this seems like there's so much dating that now happens, as we've said, outside of any community context, which I wouldn't have been fathomable, when I was 16 years old that you would date. You know, it was my youth group, it was my high school, and then it was my college, and then it was, you know, my circle of friends that I traveled in. So what can the church do? Because at the same time, you don't want to, you know, come to church and date around. That's why we have young adults groups, because we're matchmaking. You have church-based matchmaking services run by, you know, elder ladies like they used to in 1700.
I know Caitlin's a fan.
Yeah.
Caitlin's a fan.
We did a whole episode. We did a whole Getting Schooled episode about matchmaking where I was like, this is what people should be doing. And also, we were just joking at my church the other day that our pastor has not set up enough people at the church, and we're like shirking pastoral responsibility. If people want to be married and you're their pastor, help them out.
My wife tried to matchmake between our pastor and another woman we knew, and neither of them appreciated it. So that didn't go very well.
No, Phil, to be very clear, this is something people should do if the people that they are matchmaking have requested it.
Oh,
no one should be match-made against their will. No one should.
I see where we went wrong.
See, that was an easy fix. An easy fix right there.
Thank you. Sky,
back to
help us.
Your question, Phil, what can the church be doing? Not to overstate the issue, but I don't think the church is the problem here. Because if someone's involved, if a single person who wants to find somebody is involved in a church, they're engaging in local community kind of stuff that is probably more the problem for people who are not likely to engage. I'm not saying being a part of a church automatically solves this problem, but I think there's such a huge number of... I know I'm not saying the church doesn't have a role, but when you look at the macro statistics here, I think the bigger problem is people who are not engaged in the kind of communities that churches provide.
If our neighbors are hurting, the church has a role. Okay, Sky? Okay.
Well, that's not...
Caitlin?
That's not it. What I'm frustrated by is not just that, okay, the church is not the solution. It's also that the church has, to your point earlier, Sky, we have diminished our own religion. We have failed to live the way that we should. And one significant way is that our churches have been modeled off of the dominant American cultural norm for the last 100 years that said the basic unit of life, and maybe all you need in your life, is a nuclear family, 2.5 kids, you know, husband and wife, and that's it. And we've modeled our church programs around that. We've modeled our appeals. We're a family-friendly church. Come with your family and kind of get some family time. We have not lived as the family of God, where I love that when I look out on the pews in my church, I can't always tell who's going to get in a car and go home together, because there's couples that are sitting with other people. There's children that get passed down a pew. But that is not the norm in most churches. Right. Most churches just say, we'll accept that this is how things have been for the last 100 whatever years in America. And now that that's changing, we don't know what to do. And instead, this is an opportunity to say, we could live the way we were supposed to live, where we belong to one another more deeply than we belong to other people.
I obviously agree, and Phil made that point earlier, that the church shouldn't stigmatize people who aren't married or who don't desire to be married or not have. That they should be fully included parts of our communities and our churches, and it shouldn't be the assumption that to be a real member of the church you have to be part of some nuclear family. And yet, the data we're seeing in this article is saying that there's a lot of American adults who desire to be married or to have children, whatever, who are struggling to make that happen. And so how does a church navigate not stigmatizing singleness while also acknowledging there are a lot of single people out there, increasing numbers in our society, who don't want to be single? So that's the tension. And I don't think the primary problem here is the church. I don't know the statistics and how they're different, but what we do know is there's an increasing number of adults, especially young adults, who are not involved in a religious community. Mm-hmm. And so they're less likely to meet a partner in that kind of incarnate community, which is why they end up looking on apps and all these other disincarnate ways of doing it. So I think there are bigger systemic issues going on here than just what churches should be saying or not saying, programs they should have or not have.
Oh, totally.
Do you know what I think we could provide for people as a church? Matchmaking by AI Jesus.
Oh my gosh.
If AI Jesus had access to data on everyone within, say, a 50-mile radius of you. Yeah, and then you go to AI Jesus and you say, here's Here's who I am. You already know me. You know me because you knit through my data in my mother's womb.
Oh, wow.
It's a little bit apocalyptic, but
you know it's coming. You know it's coming. There's lots of Christian dating sites, right, that are already using different metrics to try to match people. Why not just put an AI Jesus skin on it?
Caitlin, young singles groups with speed dating in church basements.
I don't know why not. No. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because if I think we need to not pretend that isn't what many people want and are looking for. Like, would someone help me wade through? I don't want to do it all online with algorithms. Want people, flesh. What?
This is where what Sky was just saying of like, on one hand, we want to make sure that we're communities that are really it's not just fully accepting of single people. It's like, are we structured in such a way that they are in rich, deep community with other people?
Validating. Yeah. Validating.
Right. Yeah. But the way that you meet that tension between this and then also wanting to say, we want to meet this need that you're experiencing. You're not happy being single. You're not happy without children, et cetera, is to say, actually, like, the more deeply intertwined your life is with other people in a church, the more they know what you desire, what your needs are, how you would like to be set up with someone who you would imagine being partnered with. Like, it's not just we should have this like single speed dating thing, and also we should have the ability for single adults to like live with families and be really integrated in people's lives. It's like, no, by being integrated into the larger life of this community, including the lives of families, that's how people used to meet people, is like they knew someone and they set you up. And I really think it's not to say that the church is the problem here, but it is to say we have not adequately kept up with what are the needs of the communities that we are in, and how are we responding to these kinds of changing demographics in a country where this is the reality, that people are not dating, they're not meeting each other. There's deep differences, political differences, education differences, money differences that are playing into people not having the kind of life that they want to have, that as Christians we would say is a really good life. We have a really positive theological vision of marriage. For being able to be the kind of community that could help people seek that is not just either having programs or not, or having people deeply involved in the lives of other people or not. It's saying like we should be so close to one another, a true family with one another, that we don't have to wonder if that person wants to be set up. We don't have to wonder what program we could create for them. We know what their needs are. And just like we would want to help someone who was in a financial bind or needed someone to take them to the doctor if they had an appointment, we would also be people who said, tell me how you feel about meeting someone. How can I help facilitate that for you? It doesn't have to be a program. It could be a lot more natural than that.
Yeah. And it is interesting to think about, because so many more, college grads flock to areas with lots of other college grads for jobs in those areas. So to a certain extent, you're around more eligible people, but it's harder to connect, because you don't have a strong church culture. You can try dating at work, and that's fraught with peril. So then, people don't want to do the nightclub bar thing anymore. So you end up on an app, as opposed to if, in the old days when you stayed home and you didn't go, I got to move into the city now for a job. And there were more jobs in smaller communities. There was also more community in smaller communities, and you would meet people because you probably stayed at your childhood church, perhaps, and you met someone that you're, Sky, what are we going to do, Sky? How are we going to fix this, Sky?
I don't know, but I almost feel like we should do a bonus segment on a whole nother aspect of this article we haven't talked about. But because we've been talking about the breakdown of community and the use of apps and digital tools to make up for that loss. But we haven't talked about the dynamic that the article also brings up, which is most men want to find a female partner who is either less educated, less successful, or less established than he is. And most women want to find a man who's more established, more successful, and more, higher up on the status bar than they are. And that's increasingly difficult.
Harder and harder to do.
Right. It's a little bit like the height thing, where most women want to date a man who's taller than them, and most men want to date a woman who's shorter than they are. But suddenly we're having a bunch of tall women and short statured men, and that creates problems in the dating pool. And that's, I think, a fascinating dynamic that there's a lot of causes for.
Well, and
but that you can't fix even if you go to church together.
Okay, we got to go. Last word, Caitlin. Last word, Caitlin. Send us out singing happy.
I just think I want to reiterate what I said before, which is there's people listening who are not just discouraged by this report. They're like, yeah, that describes my life. I'm whether you're married or you're single, I am dissatisfied with the community life that I have. And I'm recognizing, to Skye's earlier point, it seems like the system I live in is set up to keep me isolated and frustrated. And then the worst part of all of it is the message I keep hearing is this isolated, independent life is supposedly good and what I should want. And I'm dissatisfied by it. And I think the Christian message to that is like, you're not crazy for feeling like this is not a good life. It's not a good life. It's also not impossible for your life to be different than it is now. The church doesn't solve all the problems. It is messy. You will get hurt if you are close enough to people to have that kind of community. And it's also a real gift. And then ultimately, like the incredibly good news is the end of the Christian story is not my soul is saved from hell and I sit on a cloud and strum a harp. The end of the Christian story is perfect community, where the things that make having community now so difficult are restored and redeemed and healed. And it's not just me and Jesus at the end. It's me and God's people in perfect community with one another.
So we should wait and start dating then?
I don't know if you want me to get into like being like angels, no marriage in heaven. We could have that whole conversation, but I think maybe we should wait for that future.
We'll skip. I think we'll skip that. I'm motivated. I'm motivated to think about this more because it seems like a bigger issue than, I mean, we've been so distracted by Trump and election year and all of that stuff. Is like there's other big things going on in our society that are affecting lots of people other than the fact that we have partisan politics. So that's why I grabbed this story. It's like, okay, yeah, this is something we should talk about and we should keep thinking about it going forward. Okay, everybody, thanks. Go to holypost.com. And if you subscribe to HolyPost Plus, you get schooled by Caitlin Chess, and you get potted by Skye with the Skye Pod, and you get all sorts of other stuff and other stuff too. And you'll love it, and you'll help us, and we can keep doing this. And we love you guys. Coming near the end of the year. Hope you got Christmas shopping done and your tree up and looking beautiful. And we'll see you next week. Bye. This episode is sponsored by Glorify, the #1 Christian daily devotional app. If you're like me, you'd probably love to start your day in the Bible, but you're never sure where to start or what to read. You should try Glorify, the #1 Christian daily devotional app. Start your morning with a daily Bible passage, a short devotional, and then an immersive experience called Daily Walk with God. If you need a break in the middle of your day, try one of Glorify's guided meditations or listen to their curated playlist of worship songs. At the end of the day, try a sleep meditation to calm yourself down and forget all about what someone just said about you on Twitter. Am I projecting? Right now, Glorify is offering you a free 14-day trial when you visit glorifyapp.com/holypost. Right now to download the Glorify app. That's glorify-app.com/holypost to download the Glorify app for free. glorify-app.com/holypost. This episode is sponsored by Aura Digital Picture Frames. Sometimes shopping for the people we love the most can be the hardest. Our parents, our grandparents. What do they need? Probably nothing. They just love memories. But how do you give memories as a present? Simple, with an Aura Digital Picture Frame. Named the best digital photo frame by Wirecutter. Aura frames make it so easy to share unlimited pictures and videos directly from your phone to the frame. My parents are still with us, but they're not getting around as much as they used to. They love to see pics of my grandkids, their great-grandkids, and now I can update their picture frame as soon as I've taken a great photo of the little guys they love. For a limited time, visit auraframes.com and get $45 off Aura's best-selling Carver Matte frames by using promo code HOLYPOST at checkout. That's AURA frames.com, promo code HOLYPOST. This exclusive Black Friday Cyber Monday deal is their best of the year, so don't miss out. Terms and conditions apply. Today's episode is sponsored by Our Place. At the Holy Post, we love working with sponsors who want to make the world a better place. We've all been trying to cook healthier, but what if your kitchenware is part of the problem? Most non-stick kitchenware uses forever chemicals like Teflon that are under global scrutiny for their impact on the environment and on us. Our Place is a mission-driven, female-founded brand that makes cookware, kitchenware, and even countertop appliances that are completely free of forever chemicals. Even better, I'm kind of a design buff, and Our Place's pots and pans are the best darn looking pots and pans I've ever seen, honestly. And you've got to see their Wonder Oven, a combo air fryer toaster oven that looks like a work of art. Seriously, you need to check out these gorgeous products. Make your kitchen healthier and way better looking. Go to FromOurPlace.com and enter the code HOLYPOST at checkout to receive 10% off everything on their site. Our Place offers a 100-day trial with free shipping and returns. That's FromOurPlace.com, code HOLYPOST.
Back in October, the New York Times Magazine reported on the DEI program at the University of Michigan. DEI stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. The university had spent 10 years and $250 million on DEI with little to show for it. Michigan isn't alone. Corporations and universities, even very progressive ones that have made DEI a top priority, are rethinking that strategy or cutting the programs entirely. My guest today isn't surprised. Hahrie Han is a professor of political science at Johns Hopkins University. She says that the inability to change actual behavior is a perennial problem of diversity programs. The evidence is overwhelming that most DEI initiatives just don't work, which is why she was so surprised by a program at an evangelical megachurch that did. Crossroads in Cincinnati started a racial solidarity program in 2016 called Undivided. Han spent 7 years following the program and those who participated in it, both black and white. Her new book, Undivided: The Quest for Racial Solidarity in an American Church, documents their stories and why Crossroads programs succeeded where so many other diversity programs failed. But, as you'll hear in the interview, that success created unexpected challenges both for the program's participants and for the predominantly white church as well. Here is my conversation with Hahrie Han. Hahrie Han, welcome to the Holy Post.
Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
I am too, because I read your book Undivided, and gosh, I resonated with so much of this, and it feels like a journey that I've been on, and I know a lot of our listeners have been on. You talk about this Undivided program that was launched by Crossroads, a megachurch in the Cincinnati area, a predominantly white-led megachurch, and yet they started this program around issues of race and justice. And talk 2 questions up front. Fill in how you got connected to this story. And then secondly, why have you dedicated 7 years of your work to this story? What was it that attracted you and engaged you so deeply?
Yeah, great question. So I came upon the story by happenstance. So in my day job, I'm a professor of political science at Johns Hopkins. I study social movements and organizing. I've done a lot of work with faith-based organizers over the years. And I was in Cincinnati because in 2016, there was a really unusual ballot initiative in which there was an effort to try to get universal preschool with targeted resources for poor Black families in Cincinnati passed. And in order to do that, they were going to have to raise taxes on Cincinnati residents, which is always a hard thing to do. And in the 2016 election, the same year that Trump won the presidency and he also won Ohio, Cincinnati voters passed this ballot initiative by the largest margin of any new education tax in Cincinnati history. And so just as a political scientist, that was just an politically unusual event. And so I was there trying to understand, how did the coalition that passed this ballot initiative come together? And when I was there on the ground, people kept saying, there's this church, they're sending these volunteers, and usually that means like a couple people making a couple phone calls, on a Sunday night or something like that. And it turned out it was hundreds of volunteers that filled hundreds of volunteer shifts throughout the fall. They were Black, they were white, they were much younger than the typical profile of church volunteers. And they had really helped drive this broad coalition that passed this initiative. And it turns out they came from the largest evangelical megachurch in the country. And I grew up in the Catholic Church. I didn't grow up in Protestant evangelicalism, so I was not familiar with megachurch culture or these kind of churches. And so when I heard that, I thought this is really unusual, partly just because of the sheer unusual nature of the church, but partly because of all the data that was coming out, sort of saying, 8 in 10 white evangelicals voted for Trump. How was it that so many of these same people from this same community were also driving support for this ballot initiative? And so that's what prompted me to get involved. And then as I dug into it, honestly, it blew my mind and my heart open in ways that few research projects do. And I think it was that constant process of feeling like I was just constantly on my learning edge that made it feel like I just couldn't stop digging in and digging in and digging in.
Fascinating. We'll get into the details of the book in a moment, because the way you've written it and structured it is probably not what people would assume. It's far more narrative and personal than sometimes we expect of these projects. But talking about Crossroads itself, there was a leader there, not the senior pastor, but one of the pastors on staff, a Black pastor named Chuck Mingo, who launched this program called Undivided. And I want to begin by talking about how it was different than other so-called DEI programs. You, throughout the book, unpack some of what's now become commonplace criticism of corporate DEI programs. They're more interested in looking like they're solving problems than actually solving them. You talked about Promise Keepers, that movement from the 90s, the evangelical men's movement from the 90s that had a big focus on racial reconciliation. But you argue that it actually looked a lot more like DEI programs, but with emotional fervor. Right. And then there's an emphasis in corporate DEI programs, this assumption that the problem is just informational. If you just give people the right facts about racial bias, then their behaviors will correct themselves. And Mingo and Crossroads and Undivided went a different route. Can you explain how the program they put in place in the church was different than the corporate DEI stuff that so many of us kind of roll our eyes about today?
Yeah, for sure. So when Chuck started the program, he didn't necessarily go out with this intention to start a program, that was going to be a 6-week racial justice program. It kind of grew out of a calling that he felt in 2015 to speak out about issues of race. He had grown up in the Black church in Philadelphia, had ended up on the pastoral team at Crossroads, and it was unusual for him in a lot of ways to be in a church that didn't put race at the center of what they were preaching. And in 2015, there was a police shooting of an unarmed Black man in Cincinnati that brought a lot of the national debate to their backyard. And so Chuck felt very called to speak out. And when he did, he had an unexpected outpouring of support from the community. And that's what made him think, okay, I have to build something. And I sort of tell that story because I think there's a spirit of experimentation from the outset that infused Undivided. And he put together a leadership team from people within Crossroads, but also from leaders around the city who had experience with these kinds of DEI programs, racial justice programs, organizing, all these different kind of relevant questions, and said, and they spent a year together constructing what became Undivided. And I think from the beginning of that, a lot of them came in with skepticism, both about what DEI programs can accomplish, because some of them had done it professionally in their own work, but also about whether or not it was possible to do something like this within the context of a church like Crossroads. And I think the skepticism came from this idea that historically, a lot of the racial reconciliation programs that some of these leaders had seen in evangelical churches really focused on either just, pouring information into people's heads and trying to exhort them to take actions that would solve problems of racial justice, or to focus only on bias that people might have in their hearts, but not at all on the structural properties of injustice and how it plays out in our society and in our organizations. And so the leadership team that was formed around Undivided was committed to trying to tackle racial justice and not just, interpersonal racial reconciliation, but also to do it in a way that allowed the participants of Undivided to own the results of the change. And I think that's one of the big differences between Undivided and the DEI programs that I have to do at my own university, where, they tell me what implicit bias is. Maybe I'll take some tests that sort of help reveal my own prejudices. And then they tell me that if I'm confronted with situations of bias, here are the ways in which I must act. And usually it's a very legalistic kind of formula for how I must behave in those situations. And so even when I come across those situations, then I feel like I'm following someone else's directions, right? I'm in a game that someone else is controlling. I myself am not the architect of the solution. And I think Undivided from the beginning wanted to move people to a place of vulnerability where they would both be motivated to want to think about different solutions, but then also create a kind of social context in which they could take the risks that were necessary to make that possible.
So one of the things that makes your book so engaging is it's not written as an academic exploration of this program. It's not even written, I would argue, as a journalistic exploration of this program, but you follow the stories of individuals. Chuck, who we've already mentioned, who launched it, and then three others you name as Sandra, Jess, and Grant. And you see their development through the 6 weeks of the program. You get into their personal lives, their backgrounds, their families. And so you're drawn into the narratives of these individuals. And it's powerfully, beautifully done. But that was the other strong component of Undivided. These individuals were given control over the outcomes, but it was so deeply relational. It felt like the program didn't fall into the illusion that if we just give people the correct information, that leads to transformation. But relationship changes people. Talk about how you found these individuals and why you selected them to carry the narrative and message of your book.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I worked really hard on trying to construct the stories and struggle with this question about what the best way to tell the story is. And I think in the end, I just felt like the work that Undivided was asking people to do and the power of what I witnessed when I was a part of the community was so deeply grounded in people's in their own hearts, but also in the journeys that they had in their relationships with each other. And so it felt like the only way to tell the story was through the stories. In order to find people who are the kind of core, quote unquote, characters in the book, Chuck, Sandra, Jess, and Grant, I talked to dozens, maybe hundreds of people who are part of Undivided. I sat through many, many sessions of the program and met lots of different people. And I think in the end, I focused on these four, partly because, there's a nice symmetry. There's a Black man, a Black woman, a white man, and a white woman. So you kind of see the way in which this work of racial justice plays out differently for different kinds of people. But partly because all four of these people were willing to allow me into their stories in a pretty open way. And I think that the power of the program really depends on people being willing to engage with each other in that kind of open way. And so I couldn't describe it without having that same openness in the people who I was following. And so, I certainly am very grateful to all of the people in the book who, in a way, gave me the gift of their stories. And, I only hope that the book does justice to the stories that they were willing to share with me.
Well, I think that's what makes it such I don't know how many in our audience have read books about the church in America and race, but there's a lot of them out there.
Right.
And yours being so narrative driven and frankly messy in those realities, like things don't get all tied up with a bow at the end. And it just felt very real and honest. And I could map onto many of their stories, some of my own experience. One thing I want to talk about, though, is you track these folks through their engagement with Undivided and the response to Undivided within the larger Crossroads community up through roughly 2020, 2021. And
yep.
I recognize that this is a microcosm of what a lot of us within or adjacent to evangelical communities in America were experiencing. There was this real openness to talking about race, including structural race issues in our society. And there were a lot of initiatives happening around that. And then there was the backlash. And that's actually what you call the second half of the book, the backlash. Yeah. So let's talk about that. Even in the introduction, you say this: Crossroads, the church, sometimes seemed unsure about how to balance the tension between leading their community versus merely acting as a mirror for people's existing views. And Crossroads enabled Undivided, this program, but it didn't necessarily share its goals. And that rang true for me, that in so many of our Christian communities, it was like, of course we're against racism. Of course we want reconciliation. Of course we want justice and harmony. But then when they actually go down that road, a lot of those same institutions are like, well, but that's not what we meant. Talk about how the success or effectiveness of Undivided ended up causing problems for Crossroads, the church.
Yeah. So just one thing I want to pick up on that you said before is just is the point about the messiness, which, again, like that just goes back to what we were just talking about, which is part of the reason why I also wanted to ground the book in narrative, is that stories enable us to capture the messiness. Like if there's, and part of what I'm hoping that people take away from the book is that there's not a formula to doing this, right? I'm not claiming that Undivided has some secret formula that they unlocked, and if only we would all take the program, then we would eradicate racial justice in America, right? The idea is that what they did was they created a space for people to grapple with the messiness, and then a structure and a vehicle through which they could channel that work. And I think that's what's really important is, when I came away from doing all this work in the book, both the characters in Undivided and Crossroads, a church, made choices that I didn't necessarily always agree with, but I really respected their willingness to stay in the struggle, and I think that's what we need really to figure out how we're going to solve some of these problems. And so to that point, Crossroads definitely did struggle with Undivided, absolutely. And it played out in a variety of different ways. I think when Chuck first preached about his calling to speak out on racial justice, Brian Tome, who's the head pastor of Crossroads, who's white, he spoke the next Sunday, and he said, because they had gotten some backlash, after Chuck made those comments, and he spoke out really forcefully and said, look, like, Chuck speaks for me on this issue, right? And if you're disturbed that Chuck had a calling and he spoke out about that, then you need to rethink whether or not this is the right church for you. So that was
and
a really
that's
bold.
2015, correct?
That was 2015, right?
Yeah.
And so it was even in that moment, that was a really bold thing to say, right? Because that's after, Ferguson, Trayvon Martin. I mean, just sort of all the different things that had been going on in America at the time, the rise of Trump and everything. And but then as Undivided grew and began and, had a lot of success with the ballot initiative in 2016, and then began to take on other kind of issues having to do with incarceration and so on within Ohio, then Crossroads really pulled back in a way. And I think around 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, when a lot of questions about institutional reactions to the debate around policing became very politicized, Crossroads was kind of tacking back and forth between wanting to support Chuck and support Undivided, but not feel like they're taking what they perceive to be political stances, and that tension between what do we think of as political and what do we think of as justice and oriented around Christian values was a tension I think that Crossroads as a church really struggled with. And so there were times when they would try to kind of rein Undivided leaders in, to be less forceful in their critique of some of the political issues of the day. And there were times when they offered their full support in the ways that, that we've talked about. And so it's that kind of tacking back and forth, I think, that caused a lot of both strategic, but also personal struggles for the leaders of Undivided. And, the book talks about some of Chuck's own personal indecision around how he wants to handle that tension, because he's both the leader of Undivided, but also on the pastoral staff of Crossroads. And, as a Black leader, he has to really struggle with when is the right time for him to push and when is the right time for him to, navigate the tension more strategically.
Yeah, this, again, is something that so many of us experienced at the same time this was going on at Crossroads. We were experiencing it around the country in different ways. I remember Phil Vischer, who's my partner in this podcast, creator of VeggieTales. We did an episode around 2018, I think, about the history of racism in America. And our interns at the time were looking at the stats, and they said we had the most downloads we'd ever had of any episode we've ever done. And yet the week after that, our numbers dropped in half. Not half from the high, but half from our previous averages. Yeah. And we had them investigate this for a long time. We realized there was a hunger among American Christians to talk about these issues. But by 2020, especially, there was such a backlash. I remember even here in Wheaton, where I live, there were all kinds of churches and white Christians mobilized around these issues to the point of joining public protests, even in 2020 after blanking, I'm sorry, on the stuff
George
in
Floyd.
Minneapolis. And then George Floyd, sorry, and then almost within months, it was amazing how it became, quote unquote, politicized. We're not going to talk about politics in our church. And it just got shut down immediately. Right. And especially in a megachurch like Crossroads, the tensions there are really, really hard. You quoted Brian, the lead pastor, at one point saying, I absolutely want people of color to feel seen and heard, but I also don't want to give up on the people who are racist. Mm-hmm. Speaking about the diversity of people within their own congregation. What this ultimately led to is Undivided being spun out as an independent nonprofit, and a number of the leadership of Undivided in exiting as well. And you talk about the tension of those decisions that people had. And at one point in the book, you talk about the danger of when too many of those voices leave, it allows the institution to become more homogenous and entrenched. I have seen that all over the country. And yet I don't know what to think about it, because on one level, I totally understand those, especially leaders of color, who are like, I can't thrive in this environment. And yet those white dominant institutions lose something when those voices depart. Since writing the book, have you encountered that more? And what wisdom do you have for those who might be wrestling with exactly that dilemma?
Yeah. So that's a really hard question to wrestle with. And it's true. It happens not only in faith institutions and in all kinds of organizations that we inhabit. And there's a writer, Nick Lehman, who I quote in the book, who sort of talks about this idea where, messaging campaigns, social media, like a lot of the communications work that we do is really important, but in the actual work of social change, all of that kind of stuff is what he calls the snack food of politics, that real change happens through the institutions that we inhabit, whether it's, churches, workplaces, families, like all these kind of things, is that like our lives are structured through institutions, and those institutions reproduce the inequalities that we're willing to tolerate or not, essentially. And it's a real provocation for all the reasons that you pointed out, because on the one hand, when we are all in institutions that become unbearable because they create so much personal tension for us, what is the line between giving up on, the prospect of making change versus having to protect your own health, like create spaces of real belonging for yourself, And I think there's no formulaic way to answer that question. But what I will say is that that's why I think it's so important for us all, for all the institutions that we inhabit, regardless of how homogenous or not they are, to push those institutions to stay in the struggle, So it's like even groups that are, my background, my family is Korean, so even groups that are, sort of primarily Korean by origin, or groups that are primarily women, because I'm a woman, or whatever these things are, or ones that are really heterogeneous, we all have work that we have to do to grapple with this question of what does it mean to take seriously the dignity of all people, and how we're all humans, we're all flawed. And so the institutions that we create are flawed too, but how do we keep our institutions committed to continuing to grapple with the answer as opposed to pretending that we have the solution, And I think, each individual has to make choices about what their line is, about when they stay in and when they don't. But ultimately, I think if we can create the kind of structures through which that conversation is continuing to stay live, then we're in a better place than if we didn't.
So I mentioned your book kind of wraps up the narrative in 2020, 2021. Have you kept up with these folks and Crossroads, and are you going to do like a follow-up? Because in my experience, what's happened in the last 4 years is insane in a lot of these places. I don't know anything about Crossroads through my own experience, but like I saw churches and Christian organizations that I thought were fairly, not moderate's maybe the wrong word, but receptive to these ideas, like Crossroads was. Today, it's utterly unacceptable to do anything on this issue of race because it has become so associated with politics in a way that's it's just gotten bonkers to me. Is that what you're seeing too? And is there any interest in doing follow-up stories, whether a book or articles on what's happened?
Yeah, I am interested. I'll have to see, kind of how the community evolves. But here's what I will say. So, it's very common for Crossroads to spin out programs that it incubates into like independent organizations. So it wasn't necessarily unusual for it to do that with Undivided. And so Undivided continues. It still does work in Crossroads. It also works in other churches across the country. And so that is continuing. And Chuck Mingo, who is the Black pastor that started Undivided, when they first spun it out as a nonprofit, he he took a leave from the pastoral team at Crossroads to really focus on being the executive director, essentially, of this new nonprofit. As he got that off the ground, he actually chose just within the last 6 months to return full time to ministry in Crossroads. And so that means, and part of the reason why Crossroads wanted to call him back is because they wanted him to help lead their work on navigating this question about race and difference within the church. So they have not, I think they still grapple with questions about when is it too political and when is it just consistent with the kind of community that we want to create. But they haven't backed away from it as much as some other institutions that I've seen, and so and they've stayed committed enough that Chuck decided he wanted to go back to be able to help build and lead that work. How that plays out, I think, is going to be really complicated because undoubtedly it's going to be a complicated set of years coming up before us. And so I too am curious to see how it plays out. But here's one other thing that I'll say is that, so I mentioned, like, I didn't grow up in the evangelical church, and, probably my assumptions about it were governed by what I read in the news. And one of the things that I hope, people who are outside the community in a way take away from the book is that I think there's a lot more heterogeneity within the people who adhere to the faith than is commonly understood. And I think part of that is because there are people who might not claim the political label of evangelical, but yet still adhere to the kind of faith tenets of the faith. And so there's a lot of complicatedness in how we define what that means.
Right.
But I think for a church like Crossroads that has always tried to stay apolitical, whatever that means, they're really focused on this question of how do we bring more people to God? And they are grappling with the reality of the fact that the country is and the world is just way more diverse now than it was years ago. And so they as a church have to figure out how to meet that moment, And so that, I think, it continues to be a value of the church. How they do that in a way that balances all these complex tensions that we're talking about, I think is something that we'll still have to see how it plays out.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you being a vehicle for reporting on that. And given your background as an outsider to this community, I think sometimes you can see things more clearly than those who are inside, who have biases and baggage. You mentioned the word apolitical, and I think you quoted Brian, the leader of Crossroads, at one point saying that Jesus is apolitical. And this has come up a lot in conversations over the years on our show. And two things. First of all, I'm not sure I agree with him that Jesus is apolitical. I think there's an awful lot that we miss in our reading of the New Testament because of our dislocation from that time and culture, that we don't recognize the politics of what's really going on there. But number two, if you do believe Jesus is apolitical, then anything that gets labeled political suddenly gets removed from the purview of the church's engagement.
Yes.
And I think that's part of what's happened is in 2015, 16, 17, 18, there was a sense of issues of race and injustice were cultural, they were spiritual, they were relational, they were communal, and therefore the church could engage them. But as more and more of those things got labeled by people as political, a lot of church leaders said, okay, now they're off the table. I can't talk about them anymore. And so as our culture increasingly politicizes more and more things, everything, from football to beer to whatever, all these things are becoming political now.
Yeah.
what the church is allowed to talk about gets more and more narrow as a way of protecting people. And like I said at the beginning, you noted that Crossroads struggled with, to what degree do they lead their people, and to what degree are they just called to reflect back to their people what they want? And especially in a megachurch, which has very high overhead and is very much committed to drawing in as many people as possible, it seems like they're more susceptible to falling into the trap of just giving the people what they want rather than challenging them, which is ironic because Jesus did the opposite. He did challenge the people a lot. So these same institutions that claim to say we are trying to reflect Jesus, in a weird way, are undermined by the fact that they're beholden to the offering plate and to the support of lots of people who don't hold the views that Jesus holds. So anyway, with that, I'm curious, as we wrap up this part of the interview anyway, have you gone beyond Crossroads and beyond Undivided to see how this is manifesting in other parts of the American church? And are there other stories out there that give you a sense of either hope or maybe despair over what you're seeing happening now?
Yeah. So I just want to reflect for a moment on what you said about the political thing, because I think what you said is exactly, it's so right. Just a couple thoughts that I'll just offer just as a plus, as a both and to what you said is, I think sometimes we confuse the word political and partisan, and that, it's like things can be political, like small p political, without being partisan. And I think those are things that, institutions like churches should engage on, really. And, there's a famous political philosopher who says that, politics are the public actions of free men, which the idea is that, like, whenever we are doing the work with other people of trying to figure out how do we forge a common life together, like that is politics, and it's a hard question to answer when we're trying to forge a common life with people who are different from us. But we've gotten so habituated to thinking that, like, oh, the minute it touches anything that has to do with, political parties, like it's impolite to talk about, that I think we do a disservice to real questions about how is it that, like, what is the world that we all want, And to get to the actual question that you asked, and so like part of what I've really loved about this project is it has brought me into a world that I wasn't necessarily familiar with before. And I think what gives me hope is, Undivided is one of many programs in the landscape of American faith institutions, both Protestant, evangelical, and others, that are grappling with questions about justice, about race, about difference within their communities. Obviously, I think there's a real variety in how much they confront issues of structural injustice and how effective or not they are. But what gives me hope is that what I see when I go and visit a lot of these other programs and other kinds of churches is that I think there's a hunger for that amongst a lot of people who are struggling with questions of faith and justice and their communities. And so the fact that hunger is still there, even given all the sort of viciousness of our politics, is, I think, hopeful to me. And, one way that I've been thinking about the problem is that the problem in a way is kind of like a supply side problem. Like, the demand is there, and we have to create the sort of programs and the opportunities and the invitations that meet the hunger that people have. And I hope that telling stories like Undivided can help do that.
I hope so too. Thank you for telling the story of Undivided. It's a beautiful book, and anybody who's interested in these topics, again, it's a wonderful entry into the discussion because it is so narrative driven, and you feel a real affinity and attachment to the characters that you profile in here, and yet you use it as a springboard to talk about these much broader dynamics of our culture and society right now. Again, the book is called Undivided: The Quest for Racial Solidarity in an American Church. Hahrie, would you be willing to stick around for a few minutes to have a bonus conversation about a story that you tell? Just for those of you who are HOLYPOST Plus subscribers, you later in the book talk about a meeting that happened in 2018 at Wheaton College. Mm-hmm. It was an off-the-record meeting with a bunch of evangelical leaders that illustrated some of these tensions. I happened to be there. Mm-hmm. And since you report about it, I feel like we can talk about it to a certain degree. So I want to engage with you about that in a bonus segment that we'll have. Thank you for being on the show. And I hope that your research continues, because I want you to keep writing on this topic because you do it so well. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I really loved the conversation.
Before we leave you this week, I do have a sad announcement. Amy Lowe, who I interviewed in September on episode 634 about her book, The Brave in Between, has passed away. She died on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, surrounded by her family. If you listen to our interview, you'll recall that Amy was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer 5 years ago. Her book is a beautiful and brutally honest memoir about the courage it takes to live in what she called the last room between life and death. Amy knew she was in that last room since 2019, and I'm grateful that she shared the wisdom she found there with the rest of us. Wisdom about faith, about forgiveness, and about gratitude. Please keep Amy's family, especially her 2 children, Lucy and Connor, in your prayers.
The Holy Post podcast is a production of Holy Post Media, produced by Mike Strelo, editing by Seth Gorvet. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by subscribing to Holy Post Plus at holypost.com/plus. Also, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much, much more.